A Kitsune Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 20, Showdown. The sound of 500 men and women charging at you across a field would normally be both deafening and frightening. To Naruto, it was neither of those things. Firstly, the mask he wore contained seals that were able to dampen noise that rose above a certain level, such as explosions. Another being a seal that made the inside of the mask transparent, so that operatives were not hampered by peripheral vision through eye holes. Secondly, he wasn't frightened because not only in a pouch hundreds of kunai were stored with one of the most complex seal matrix known to shinobi, but also because he had a rather aggressive furry friend. So when the first of the horde reached him, he was rather lax in reaching for his katana and tanto, drawing them at a rather sluggish pace. Somehow, even behind his mask, he managed to project the visage that he was bored and uncaring. He didn't even move as the first shinobi reached him and consistently dropped at his feet. He held his katana loosely as blood dripped along the fine edge. The surviving front runners tried to halt their advance but were shoved forward by the masses behind them. Straight into Naruto's suddenly advancing form, they dropped too, swiftly followed by those behind them and those behind them, and on it went with ease. Naruto simply cut a swath through the army, never once stopping or taking any hits in return. It was like cutting grass. Sometimes they didn't even see what killed them before the head rolled off their shoulders or spilled their innards. He waded his way to the center of the army, and still they came, one after another, to cover the ground in their bodies. Eventually they got the idea. A ring appeared around Naruto, his sword and armor bloody both, as he stood amongst them, not even breathing heavily. Near 100 lay dead, and finally did Naruto begin using his chakra. He gathered it in his lungs, holding a hand sign to his lips, expelling a stream of fire out towards the innermost reaches of the ring, incinerating all those immediately around him as he spun around for maximum effect. Before even the ashes had settled, he launched himself back into the mob, bodies flying back, bisecting and missing limbs as blades of wind could cut through them, half a dozen at a time. Those with enough space or simply didn't care enough tried to return fire with their own jutsu, but this too proved inefficient. Naruto was either simply too fast and moved out of the way, or threw his own back at them, tending to counter the jutsu heading towards him and killing its caster and those around them. And through it all he was completely silent. There were no incantations for his jutsu, no grunts or growls or yells of exertion. He was completely silent, as if the whole thing bored him into silence. And for the shinobis attacking, this was terrifying, because as more and more of their comrades fell, they began to realize just how well and truly they were fucked up. Their deliverer came in the form of a cloud of mist and a blue criminal flying into Naruto with all the grace of a charging bull, the Anbu barely having the chance to intercept the S-rank Tanukian with his blade before he was tossed away. Naruto flipped several times through the air before landing in a crouch and sliding, so huffing in annoyance as he numbered the armies less than 100, maybe even less than 50, as they approached him more cautiously with the support of Kisame in tow. Itachi still hung back at the rough center of the clearing, simply watching or waiting. With the addition of Kisame to the fight, the odds were more evenly matched, perhaps even against him, meaning he needed to regain the upper hand. Firstly, he needed to get rid of the grunts, and with that thought he zipped into the forest, and now much smaller army followed swiftly. Line break. Naruto, much like all Konoha shinobi, was an expert in fighting in his native terrain, the trees. If you were able to imagine just how large the forest was that encompassed the Fire Country, Anbu especially knew pretty much the entire tree line like their own homes and uniform, and while the Emerald Forest was in Konoha, the similarities were there. That was enough for him. The Konoha Nunkin had the same idea as him and had taken to the trees, but more than a few had passed his spot, none the wiser. The rest had spread out still at ground level. All were easy pickings. Naruto silently dropped from the canopy to a lower branch behind an unsuspecting ex-Konoha shinobi. Cleanly slicing his neck, he grabbed the body and leaned it against the trunk. He ducked back into the trees not long after before prying on another group's who had naively taken to the branches, dispatching them with quick slices and precious throws. He immediately ducked behind the trees as someone threw a brace of kunai at him. A second later he flashed away when he sensed an explosive tag among the weaponry. Reappearing on a branch opposite, he used the distraction from the ensuing explosion to launch his own counterattack in a swift but large fireball, which engulfed the group of three on the ground. He was backflipping along the branch to dodge a swipe from a katana and drew his tanto from his back, easily countering a second stab a moment later. His fist slammed into the man's stomach, followed by his elbow to the sternum, and finally the hilt of his tanto on the nose before a quick slice of the neck. In the same movement he deflected a trio of shuriken as he turned and with his offhand throwing a groove back enhanced with wind. A second later he disappeared and reappeared among the aggressive group via a Horashin kunai he had hidden in the shuriken, dispatching another five before they had even realized he'd moved. As the bodies dropped, he sensed a large increase in chakra from behind him. He spun around while moving through hand signs, and some water from a nearby stream coalesced in a large wall in time for several fireballs to impact and detonate, covering the immediate area in a thin layer of steam and smoke. Dispelling the shield, he slipped into the screen as the larger group of 20 dropped down onto the ground where he was once standing. With a small smirk underneath his mask, he triggered the explosive tags he had left behind, and the group was consumed in a large ball of fire. He prepared to push his advantage until he sensed the remainder of the army rushing in his direction, with only who he could presume as Kisame at the head. Deciding not to take that fight head on, he once again disappeared back into the tree line to wait them out. The move was anticipated, and Naruto suddenly found himself blocking a kunai thrusting towards his throat. He tried to counter with a kick, but an elbow already burrowed itself into his stomach, swiftly followed a kick that threw him onto his back. Rolling with the momentum, he stood and turned out the path of the same kunai, receiving a slight cut across the arm, and thrust with his tanto, which was parried in the same moment. Naruto blocked a knee towards his stomach and threw his own kick aimed at his opponent's chest, which connected, creating an inch of breathing room between the two. Itachi, Naruto hadn't realized before. Shrouded in shadows as they were, the moment passed and they were back at each other. Tanto pressed against kunai as the two fought for superiority. Naruto made the first move as he angled his tanto so that the kunai slid off the blade to an angle, throwing the Uchiha off balance right towards Naruto's swinging knee, which impacted Nukin's chest, only for Itachi to disappear in a plume of smoke, leaving Naruto vulnerable to counter with a swift stab from behind. Naruto then, too, switched with a shadow clone. Naruto reappeared underneath the branch and swung himself up to mule kick Itachi in the side, throwing him off and onto a lower adjacent branch. He prepared to follow, but looked at his feet to see several already lit explosive tags and swore under his breath. A hastily shunshin later, he appeared opposite Itachi once more and jabbed at the man's throat, which was slapped aside almost easily. As the two re-engaged in a heated taijutsu battle, Naruto noticed something, or rather lack thereof. As he looked closer, he could make out what looked like bandages around the Uchiha's eyes. He was blind? So how are your eyes treating you, Itachi? He couldn't help but comment, judging by the force behind the follow-up punch. It was not appreciated. You should have surrendered, Naruto-kun. It would have made your death that much more swift, Itachi replied. After the death of my brother, you have a lot to repent for. Naruto scoffed and frowned underneath his mask as he dug underneath the kick. Repent? Sasuke was mad. He tried to destroy Konoha, killed my soon-to-be wife, and tried to kill me. He spat, stabbing forward with his tanto, only succeeding in cutting air. Perhaps, but Sasuke was to kill me and restore the honor of the Uchiha clan. Itachi replied, monotone, countering with a small stream of fire. Afterwards, without seals. Naruto leant back and formed a seal in response, spitting a glob of water in intercept, wisely jumping back from the steam as Itachi dived through. Honor! What honor? Your clan were traitors and thieves. Itachi stalled long enough at the response that Naruto's retaliatory stab caught the man across the shoulder was the grunted response. Eventually, that was the end of the conversation when Itachi launched himself back forward. Naruto moved similarly, and both threw a kunai which clashed in between them. They passed an instant later with a metal clang and a shower of sparks. Sliding to a stop, Naruto jumped first and was given an elbow to the mask. In return, he launched his knee up, which was blocked up, but Naruto scored on a return slice across the man's cheek instead. Naruto's arm came up to block a return and stabbed forward with his kunai, forcing Naruto to step back. As he did so, he switched hands with his tanto and stepped forward when Itachi followed into the man's guard and headbutted him with the rim of his mask. He swung wide his arm, forcing Itachi down towards his tanto came up, but Itachi anticipated the move and leaned forward into Naruto's space, elbowing around his guard into the Ambu's temple. Dazing him slightly, he grabbed the younger man's arms and yanked, drawing him across his back, and a swift but punishing kick to the sternum sent Naruto towards and through the trunk of the tree they were battling on. Itachi jumped through as the splinters were still falling. Just as a hiss caught his ear and his danger senses screamed at him, he switched with an unsuspecting log as the entire canopy erupted into flames and smoke. Line break. Naruto let himself spin lazily as he fell to the ground, eyes on the aftermath of the roll of tags he'd shimmed out of his pouch when he went through the tree. He knew he didn't kill Itachi, the shinobi was too good for that to happen, but he didn't seem to be following again, which meant they'd done their job nonetheless. With a sigh, he twisted one last time and landed on the soft ground, unfortunately among another group of Noonkin, unfortunately for them, that is. Drawing his katana from his back and sheathing his tanto instead, he easily dispatched them with a few precious strikes before they'd even realized he dropped beside them. He had hoped he had hoped them for a minor reprieve, lost as he thought he was in the foliage. However, was not meant to be, as with a roar, several more shinobi broke through the undergrowth and charged with reckless abandonment. Clearly they hadn't learned from their previous mistakes. As he raised his katana in response and met them head on, "Kid, we need to talk," Kurama spoke up in his head as he began slicing his way back through the grunts. "Is this really a good time?" Naruto questioned as he blocked a ninjato and killed the man wielding it. "You've been poisoned," the fox stated bluntly. Naruto frowned as he kept fighting despite the news. "How? I thought with you and my Uzumaki genetics I was immune to most if not all poisons," he replied, a pit forming in his stomach, thinking back to when Itachi first scored a mark on him. "As did I," the Bijuu grumbled in annoyance, and if the situation weren't so serious Naruto may have smiled at the thought. "This is different. It's actively fighting my yokai. We have a very big problem on our hands." Naruto remained silent for a beat as he continued fighting those that dared get close enough. "That is a problem. How bad are we looking?" "For now, you're fine, but as time goes on it's going to get harder and harder for me to fight this and help you at the same time. Whatever this poison is, it's specifically tailored to fighting Bijuu chakra. I'd hazard a guess that it's your Uzumaki parentage that is allowing you to fight as I have been," Kurama answered grimly. "Tailored to fight Bijuu? How? Has Naruto killed another Iwa Noonkin?" A thought that he really didn't like passed through his mind, distracting him enough for Kisame to once more reappear and slam the flat side of Samehada into his chest, tossing him through several trees and back into the clearing where it had originally begun. Naruto rolled multiple times before he got his footing and slid into a crouch, gingerly holding his tender ribs. He breathed out heavily as a chill ran down his back. "The other Jinchuriki?" Silence was the answer. Anger slowly filed him as Itachi and Kisame nonchalantly shushed into the clearing in front of him. Naruto bared his katana at them. "What have you done?" he hissed, with poorly veiled contempt. Kisame grinned, large and bloody, swinging his blade onto his shoulder. "Nothing that Noticed that finally. The other Jinjuriki, he questioned. Dread came next. This time Kisame laughed, loudly and cruelly. Don't worry, brat. You'll be joining them soon enough, he replied. For a small moment, Naruto was completely still as he processed the information he was given. Then came fury, pure and utter fury that he hadn't felt since Sasuke's year ago. He blade shook as he fought to control the outburst of emotion, but it was a losing battle and he knew it. Naruto, Kurama spoke up from his mind with fox calmness, but he'd known him for years. He could hear, feel the rage similar, if not more so, to his own. Kill them both, destroy them, wipe them from the surface of the damn planet, avenge our brothers and sisters, he demanded from the seal. Naruto didn't hesitate to agree. The ground beneath him fractured as he propelled himself forward with his own roar of anguish appearing before Kisame in less than a blink of an eye. Judging by the widening of his eyes, he certainly wasn't expecting to get sent flying back towards the tree line at breakneck pace. The Jinchuriki sensed more than saw Itachi try to react beside him. Spinning on the spot, he pinned the man with a devastating 180 kick that he was sure cracked at least a couple ribs. The ground underneath cracked at the force he was hitting with. Neither was down for long, and the response came in two large dragons made of fire and water, intending to crush him in the middle. Naruto turned to the first water dragon, channeling wind chakra through his katana and swinging, creating an arc of solid wind that decapitated the dragon, forcing it to pre prematurely detonate. Naruto faced the second dragon, which had grown closer as he focused on the first. Then quickly he retrieved the Hiraishin kunai from his pouch and pushed water chakra into the metal before flicking it through the fire manifested just as it reached his position. He appeared conveniently less than 5 feet in front of Itachi, who was already in motion with a kunai, which Naruto calmly sidestepped and countered with his own stab, connecting with the Uchiha's chest. Unsurprisingly, the man disappeared in a flock of crows, which briefly obscured his vision long enough for a few dense balls of water to impact his back. The chakra-reinforced armor held but threw him forward into a roll. Following the roll, Naruto pushed himself into a flip over Samehada and behind Kisame, hoping to dispatch the man only for water to come into contact with the blade. As he dispelled the clone, he turned again and parried a handful of kunai thrown at him from Itachi as he re-engaged in close quarters. This time with Kisame to back him up, and Naruto was once again pressured from the powerful duo of the S-rank Nuken. Back and back he was pushed in the furious assault from the two until he was ultimately forced onto his knees, blocking Samehada dangerously close to his shoulders and barely preventing Itachi from stabbing into his kidney. Kisame chuckled again, and he applied more pressure to Naruto's katana, forcing Samehada closer to the blonde's body. Just let go, brat, and we'll promise to try and make it quick. The fish-man tried persuading. Naruto grunted at a sudden impact to his knees, bringing him lower to the ground and weakening his positioning. He grunted then again as the tip of Itachi's kunai pierced his armor and skin, drawing blood and likely injecting more poison into his body. Huffing it at the stain, the Anbu knew he was in a tough spot. Any chakra he tried molding was immediately sucked up by the sentient blade. He couldn't press Kisame due to the kunai worming its way into his stomach, and he couldn't press Itachi due to the swords pressing against his shoulders. The lesser of two evils it was. Naruto dropped the shoulder of Paustin, Samehada, and Kisame, voluntarily allowing Itachi to bury the kunai into his belly. Thrown off by the maneuver and suddenly without resistance, Samehada sailed over his head in a wide arc, and Itachi failed to react in time to capitalize on the wounded Jinchuriki. Being forced to release the kunai lest his arm be cut off as Naruto's katana flashed dangerously close to do so. Now free of his would-be captors, Naruto flashed to a faraway kunai that made sure to keep the two in his sight. Removing the kunai, he channeled fire chakra to his hand and pressed it against the bleeding wound, cauterizing it quickly and creating another scar. With Kurama busy with the poison, he couldn't rely on the fox to heal him. Naruto panted into slight exhaustion. No more grunts had come out of the woodwork, which he could take slight comfort in, but the two Nunkin were clearly nothing to scoff at. Fox, he asked mentally as he watched Kisame and Itachi gather themselves across the clearing. I don't know what to tell you, Brad. Whatever this poison is, it's extremely resistant to my chakra. It's actively fighting it. Sort of reminds me of when I fought your Shodaime, Kurama replied hastily. Mokuton, a poison made of Mokuton? Naruto bit his cheek beneath his mask. It would appear so. I'm honestly not sure about your chances in this fight, Brad. I'm having to focus entirely on stopping the spread of this poison, otherwise this fight would have ended a while back. Uh, Triot, they were going to fight him with attrition. The thought sat heavily in his mind. He needed a plan to fight the two. He knew Kisame was weaker in taijutsu than him, but evenly matched with Itachi after their fight in the forests. He beats Itachi in kenjutsu, but Kisame's strength and experience trumps him on. He wasn't about to try and any genjutsu on a Uchiha. In ninjutsu, he likely outmatched either of them alone, but not together. Truly, the only thing he was currently better at was fuinjutsu, and he couldn't fathom a way to beat either using it in a short amount of time as he had before he could use Sage Mode, but he would need time to gather enough to fight the two. Samehada had been sucking up a little of the amounts he had been passing. An idea came to him as his gaze snapped to Samehada. It was a long shot, but it could work. That was enough to possibly even cripple the two in close quarters. He needed to split them up. His katana swapped hands, and he began gathering chakra in his right hand, carefully forming a Rasengan in his palm. Itachi and Kisame had clocked that he was up to something and began rapidly forming hand seals together, a red flag if he'd ever seen one. Next came the difficult bit. He slowly started filtering wind chakra into the swirling ball as he gradually started advancing on the two Nunkin. Four blades of wind appeared as a shuriken as the jutsu stabilized under his care. Opposing him, Itachi and Kisame finished hand seals, simultaneously chest puffing up as they gathered chakra in their lungs. Itachi expelled his first in a large stream of fire that coalesced into a large blaze heading towards the charging blonde. Kisame followed, adding wind to the jutsu, causing the massive wall of fire to almost triple in size and turn into white hot. Naruto almost faltered. Almost, with no time to think lest he risk becoming a barbecue, he glanced at the hand holding the wind shuriken, and without a second thought threw it at the oncoming inferno, heavily banking on the fact that the Nunkin were underestimating the strength of his jutsu. He regained control over the jutsu as it approached the fire at the speed, retrieving a scroll from his pouch while sheathing his katana. Just as the shuriken passed the likes of flames, he opened the scroll and let go. The following explosion blinded him, then deafened him before the whole world became a calamity.